What would you do if the woman your husband was cheating on you with decided to humiliate you at your most vulnerable? Not in private, but in front of everyone you know. Today's story is about Amelia, 6 months pregnant and deeply in love, whose perfect life shatters when her husband's mistress, a cruel and beautiful socialite named Serafina, makes it her mission to destroy her. But Serafina made one fatal miscalculation. She never counted on Amelia's father-in-law, Arthur Sterling, a silent, watchful billionaire who plays chess while everyone else is playing checkers. This isn't just a story of infidelity. It's a story of devastating public humiliation, corporate espionage, and a father's cold, calculated revenge that no one saw coming. Stay tuned, because the final twist will leave you breathless. Amelia Sterling felt the gentle flutter of life inside her, and smiled, one hand resting protectively on the soft swell of her stomach. From her vantage point on the terrace of the Sterling family's Mayfair estate, London glittered like a carpet of scattered diamonds. It was the annual gala for the Sterling Foundation, a night of performative generosity, where the city's elite gathered to write checks and size each other up. Her husband Ethan was inside a magnetic figure, weaving through the crowd, his laughter echoing faintly. He was beautiful, charming, the heir to the Sterling fortune, and he was hers, or so she believed. Their life was a fairy tale, meticulously crafted and curated. Amelia, an art historian with a quiet grace, had met Ethan at a Sotheby's auction. He had been captivated by her passion and her lack of interest in his last name. Their courtship was a whirlwind of private jet trips to Florence and midnight walks along the Seine. His father, the formidable Arthur Sterling, had given his quiet, almost unnerving approval. Arthur was a man carved from granite and ambition, a titan of industry who spoke in clipped sentences and saw the world in assets and liabilities. His approval, Amelia knew, was the highest of compliments. But lately, a crack had appeared in the perfect facade of their life. It had a name, Serafina Dubois. Serafina was everything Amelia was not. A French model-turned-influencer with razor-sharp cheekbones and an Instagram feed that dripped with hedonistic luxury, she had recently become a fixture in their social circle. Ethan had dismissed Amelia's concerns as pregnancy hormones. "She's just a friend, darling," he'd say, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. "She's dating one of my business partners, Henry." Tonight, Serafina was a vision in blood-red silk, a stark contrast to Amelia's elegant empire waist cream gown. She moved with the predatory grace of a panther, her eyes constantly finding Ethan in the crowd. Amelia watched as Serafina cornered him near the champagne fountain. She laughed a throaty theatrical sound and placed a hand on his arm that lingered far too long. Ethan didn't pull away. He leaned in, whispering something that made her smile widen. A cold dread, sharp and unwelcome, snaked its way around Amelia's heart. Later, as she was speaking to a donor about the Foundation's new arts initiative, she felt a presence beside her. "Such a beautiful glow," Serafina purred her voice, a low, accented caress. "Pregnancy suits you. It softens your angles." Amelia forced a polite smile. "Thank you, Serafina. It's kind of you to say. Ethan is so excited." Serafina continued, taking a sip of her champagne and looking directly at Amelia's baby bump. "He talks about the baby constantly. He says he wants to give his child the world." Her eyes flickered with a strange, possessive light. "It's wonderful to see a man so invested." The implication was clear, a poisoned dart wrapped in velvet. She was speaking as if she and Ethan discussed it intimately, regularly. Before Amelia could formulate a response, Ethan was there, placing a hand on the small of her back. Darling, I was just telling Serafina we're heading off soon. You need your rest. He smiled at Serafina. Thanks for coming tonight. Of course, Serafina said, her gaze sweeping over Amelia one last time. Anything for Ethan. In the car on the way back to their Kensington home, the silence was heavy. She makes me uncomfortable, Ethan, Amelia said softly, unable to hold it in any longer. Oh, Amelia, don't start, he sighed, loosening his tie. Serafina is flamboyant. That's her personality. You're being overly sensitive. She touched your arm. She spoke about our baby as if she were a part of it. It's not right. You're imagining things, he said, his tone sharp with irritation. It's just business and friendship. Can't you trust me? The question hung in the air, a silent indictment. She wanted to, desperately. But as she looked at her husband's handsome profile illuminated by the passing streetlights, she saw a stranger. She saw the ghost of a lie in the set of his jaw. That night, Amelia lay awake long after Ethan's breathing had evened out into a deep sleep. Her hand on her belly, feeling utterly terrifyingly alone in her gilded cage. The storm was coming, and she had no idea how to prepare for it. A week later, Amelia tried to push the gala incident from her mind, attributing it to the anxieties of a first-time mother. Ethan was being especially attentive, surprising her with her favorite peonies and insisting on accompanying her to a checkup. He was trying, she told herself. She had to try too. Her respite was shattered during what should have been a joyful afternoon. She was at Petits Anges, an impossibly chic baby boutique in Knightsbridge. The store was a haven of soft cashmere and muted pastels, a place where the anxieties of the world were meant to melt away. She was examining a tiny hand-stitched bonnet when the little bell above the door chimed. Serafina Dubois glided in, dressed in a sleek black jumpsuit that seemed an affront to the store's gentle aesthetic. She wore sunglasses indoors, which she slowly removed her eyes, locking on to Amelia's with theatrical surprise. Amelia. What a coincidence, she said, her voice echoing slightly in the quiet shop. The other two patrons' wives of city bankers glanced over, their curiosity piqued. Serafina, Amelia replied, her voice tighter than she intended. I didn't realize you were in the market for baby clothes. Oh, I'm not for me. Goodness, no. She laughed, a brittle sound. I'm here for you. For the baby. She walked over to Amelia, her expensive perfume, a heavy scent of tuberose and spice, overpowering the delicate baby powder fragrance of the store. Ethan was telling me how you were worried about getting everything perfect. He worries about you. He asked me to pick up a little something since I have such excellent taste. Amelia's blood ran cold. Ethan had sent her. Why would he do that? Why would he involve this woman in the most intimate preparations of their life? That's very thoughtful of him. Amelia managed her hand instinctively going to her stomach. Isn't he just the most thoughtful man? Serafina cooed, picking up a silver rattle and examining it with disdain before dropping it. He wanted to get you this. She gestured to a display case. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was a stunning Cartier baby bracelet. A delicate gold chain with a single perfect diamond. But I told him, Ethan darling, that's so predictable. It lacks a personal touch. Serafina reached into her Chanel bag and pulled out a small, exquisitely wrapped box from a different, lesser-known but incredibly exclusive jeweler. So I found this for you instead, for the baby from Ethan and me. She offered the box. Amelia stared at it, her hands refusing to move. The phrase, "from Ethan and me," was a declaration of war. The other women in the shop were now openly pretending to browse nearby, their ears straining. "I think you've misunderstood," Amelia said, her voice low but firm. "My husband and I will be choosing our child's gifts together." Serafina's smile tightened. "Oh, darling, don't be so provincial. We're all modern people here. Ethan and I are very close. He shares everything with me. His business, worries, his dreams, his frustrations." Her eyes raked over Amelia, a subtle but devastating appraisal of her changing body. "He needs a woman who understands the pressures he's under. A partner, not just a vessel." The cruelty of the word vessel struck Amelia with physical force. Tears pricked at her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give this woman the satisfaction. "I think you should leave," Amelia said, her voice shaking slightly. Serafina let out another condescending laugh. "So sensitive. It must be the hormones." She placed the box on the counter. "Just give it to the baby. It will be our little secret." Then she leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "He gave me the Cartier bracelet, by the way. The one he told you was a family investment. It looks much better on my wrist than it would on a newborn's." To prove her point, she pushed back the sleeve of her jumpsuit. There on her slender, tanned wrist was the unmistakable glint of the Cartier bracelet from the display case. It was a piece Amelia had admired with Ethan just last month, and he had promised it would be their baby's first heirloom. The sight of it broke something inside Amelia. The casual cruelty, the public performance of it all, was designed to utterly dismantle her. She felt dizzy, the soft lighting of the store seeming to pulse around her. "Enjoy the rest of your shopping," Serafina said, sweetly, turning to leave. She paused at the door, turning back to the store assistant, who had been watching, frozen. "Please put all of Ms. Dubois' purchases on the Sterling account, the main one. Mr. Ethan Sterling's private authorization." With a final triumphant smirk at Amelia, she was gone. Amelia stood there, her heart pounding the small, beautifully wrapped box, sitting on the counter like a bomb. The other patrons were now whispering furiously. The store assistant looked at her with a mixture of pity and awe. The humiliation was absolute, a poison seeping into her bloodstream. She had been marked not as the cherished wife, but as the obstacle. The Sterling Enterprises annual Innovation Gala was the crown jewel of the London corporate calendar. It wasn't a stuffy charity ball. It was a high-tech, high-glamour showcase of the company's future held in the cavernous, glass-walled atrium of their newest skyscraper. This year, the centerpiece was the launch of a revolutionary green energy division, a project Ethan had personally overseen. It was supposed to be his night of triumph, a final step in proving himself a worthy successor to his father. For Amelia, it was an ordeal. After the incident at the boutique, a fragile truce had been established. Ethan had sworn Serafina had acted alone, that she was unhinged and obsessed. He'd apologized profusely, showering Amelia with affection and promises. He'd even shown her a blocked number on his phone, claiming it was Serafina's. Amelia, desperate to believe him for the sake of their unborn child, had allowed herself to be placated. She agreed to attend the gala to stand by his side and present the united front the Sterling name demanded. She chose a deep sapphire gown, a color that radiated confidence she did not feel. As she walked in on Ethan's arm, the flashbulbs of the press were blinding. Arthur Sterling was already there holding court with a German industrialist and a Japanese tech mogul. He gave Amelia a brief appraising nod. his sharp eyes lingering on her for a moment. In his gaze, she saw not warmth but a quiet assessment, as if he were checking a key asset for vulnerabilities. The evening was a blur of air kisses and meaningless chatter. Ethan was in his element, charming investors and schmoozing with journalists. Amelia stood beside him, a smiling, silent partner, her hand a permanent fixture on her rounded belly. For a few hours, she almost believed the lie. The first sign of disaster came when the CEO of a rival firm, a man named Alistair Finch, cornered Ethan. "Heard you've been mixing business with Pleasure Sterling," he said with a sly grin. "Dubois is a firecracker. My sources tell me she's been getting a very comprehensive tour of your operations." Ethan's face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about, Alistair," he stammered, quickly steering Amelia away. But the seed of doubt had been replanted, and this time it was growing thorns. The main presentation was about to begin. Ethan was scheduled to give the keynote speech. As the lights dimmed and a hush fell over the crowd of 500 guests, the grand glass doors at the back of the atrium slid open. Serafina Dubois stood silhouetted against the city lights. She was wearing a silver dress that looked as if it had been poured onto her body, shimmering and indecently beautiful. It clung to every curve, and it was cut so high on the thigh that a collective gasp rippled through the more conservative members of the audience. She was not on the guest list. Her arrival was a deliberate, perfectly timed act of sabotage. Ethan, standing near the stage, froze. All color drained from his face. He looked like a cornered animal. Arthur Sterling, sitting in the front row, didn't turn around. His posture remained unchanged, but Amelia, who was standing near him, saw his jaw clench, a single taut muscle flexing in his cheek. Serafina glided into the room, ignoring the frantic whispers of the event staff. She picked up a glass of champagne from a passing tray and made her way towards the front. Her eyes locked on Amelia. She stopped directly in front of her, so close Amelia could smell the gin on her breath. "Amelia," she said, her voice loud enough for everyone in the first few rows to hear. "I am so glad I caught you. I seem to have left my scarf at your husband's private apartment, the one he keeps near the office for late nights. Could you be a dear and ask him to bring it to me?" The silence was deafening. Every eye was on them. Amelia felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. Ethan's secret apartment, the one he'd told her he'd given up after they were married. "I think you're mistaken," Amelia whispered, her voice trembling. "Oh, I'm not mistaken," Serafina said with a cruel little smile. She turned to Ethan, who stood paralyzed. "Ethan, darling, tell her. Tell your sweet, naive little wife about our nights there. Tell her how you complain about her moods. Tell her how you said you were terrified of being tied down to a mother. You said you needed a lover, someone exciting." Ethan just stared, his mouth opening and closing with no sound coming out. Amelia felt a wave of nausea. She looked past Serafina, her pleading eyes finding her husband's. "Ethan, say something." He took a hesitant step forward. "Serafina, this is not the time or the place." "Not the place," she shrieked, her voice rising with manufactured hysteria. "You told me you loved me. You told me you were going to leave her after the baby was born, after you secured your position. You promised me." Then came the final devastating blow. Serafina looked down at Amelia's stomach with theatrical pity. "You think that child secures your position. He told me he feels nothing for it. He feels trapped. The real sterling heir," she paused, placing a hand on her own flat stomach, "is the one he wants to have with me. It was a lie Amelia knew it had to be, but the poison had found its mark. The humiliation was a physical agony. Her vision tunneled the faces of the guests, warping into grotesque masks of shock and pity. She could hear the frantic clicking of a journalist's hidden camera. Her life, her marriage, her future were all being shattered in real-time broadcast to the most powerful people in London. She turned and fled. She didn't run. She walked, her head held high, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. It was the only dignity she had left. She pushed past the gawking onlookers, past the horrified event staff, past her husband, who finally weakly called her name. She didn't look back. As the elevator doors slid shut, the last thing she saw was the impassive face of her father-in-law, Arthur Sterling. He was not looking at his disgraced son, nor at the hysterical mistress. His cold grey eyes were fixed on her, and in their depths she saw not pity, but the terrifyingly calm gleam of a predator who has just identified his prey. And the prey was not her. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. The next morning, the society pages and financial blogs were ablaze. "Sterling heir in shocking love triangle," screamed one headline. Photos of Amelia fleeing, of Ethan's stunned face, and of Serafina's triumphant smirk were everywhere. The Sterling Enterprises stock dipped by 3 points at the opening bell, a clear sign that the market was spooked by the instability of the family at its helm. Amelia had gone to the one place she felt safe, her small, art-filled flat from before her marriage, which she had thankfully never sold. She didn't answer Ethan's hundreds of calls and texts, each one a desperate, self-pitying plea for forgiveness. She simply sat in the quiet, the silence a balm on her raw nerves, her hands a constant shield over her child. She expected a call from Arthur Sterling, demanding she return for the sake of appearances. She expected a lecture on duty and the family name. What she received instead was a single terse text message from a number she didn't recognize. "Stay where you are. You are safe. I am handling it." As Arthur Sterling did not rage, he did not shout. Men like Arthur understood that true power was not in explosive displays of anger, but in the cold, silent application of overwhelming force. The public humiliation of his daughter-in-law, the carrier of his grandchild, and the future of his dynasty was not merely a family embarrassment. It was a declaration of war, an attack on the House of Sterling, and he would respond in kind. He convened a meeting in his private study, a room panelled in dark mahogany and smelling of old leather and power. It was not a meeting with his board of directors or his lawyers. Present were only 2 people, his son Ethan and a severe-looking man in his late 60s named David Barlow. David had been with Arthur for 30 years. Formerly of MI6, he was now the head of what was euphemistically called Sterling Global Security. In reality, he was Arthur's fixer, his spy master, the man who quietly cleaned up messes and gathered intelligence with ruthless efficiency. Ethan stood before his father, disheveled and broken. "Father, I can explain. It was a mistake. I love Amelia. Serafina is crazy. She trapped me." Arthur held up a single silencing hand. He did not look at his son. He looked at David. "I want to know everything about her." Arthur said, his voice quiet and deadly. "I want to know who she is, where she came from. I want to know the name of her first pet. I want to know every bank account she has, every call she's made, every person she's met for the last 2 years. I want to know what she had for breakfast this morning and who paid for it. Am I clear, Crystal Arthur? David replied, his own voice, a gravelly whisper. Ethan, Arthur said, finally turning his glacial gaze on his son. You will go to your office. You will not speak to the press. You will not contact Amelia. You will not contact her. You will sit there and you will do your work. If you deviate from these instructions in any way, I will personally strip you of your title, your shares, and your name. You will be left with nothing but the clothes on your back. The only reason you are still in this room is because of the child Amelia is carrying. A child who at this moment has shown more strength and dignity than you have in your entire life. Ethan paled, looking as though he'd been physically struck. He opened his mouth to speak, but a single look from his father shut it. He nodded meekly and left the room a broken man. Arthur turned back to David. This was not a crime of passion. Arthur stated not as a question, but as a fact. The timing was too perfect. The target was not Ethan. It was the launch, the disruption, the stock price. It was a corporate move wrapped in a domestic drama. My thoughts exactly, David said. A woman like Seraphina Dubois doesn't appear out of thin air. She has sponsors. Find them, Arthur ordered. I want to know which of my competitors has been paying her bills. Finch Vanguard consolidated the Japanese. We'll start with Alistair Finch, David said. His comments to your son at the party were leading. He was gloating. Good. Use all necessary resources. No limits on the budget. Arthur walked to the grand window overlooking the city. She tried to humiliate a sterling. She tried to destabilize my company. She threatened my grandchild. He paused, his reflection, a stern, unyielding silhouette against the glass. I am not going to ruin her, he said softly, a chill in his voice. I am going to erase her. I want her so buried in legal and financial ruin that the world forgets her name. And then I am going to go after the people who sent her, and I will burn their houses to the ground. David Barlow simply nodded. He had seen Arthur Sterling angry before, but this was different. This was not business. This was personal. The lion had been woken, and he was hunting. For the next 10 days, a silent, invisible war was waged. While the tabloids moved on to the next celebrity scandal, David Barlow's team worked with chilling efficiency. They were ghosts in the machine, pulling digital threads, exploiting financial backdoors, and calling in decades-old favors from contacts in every corner of the globe. The first thread they pulled was Seraphina's finances. On the surface, she lived the life of a successful influencer, funded by brand deals and modeling gigs. But her declared income didn't come close to covering her lifestyle, the penthouse apartment, the couture wardrobe, the constant travel. David's forensic accountants found the source a series of offshore shell corporations, all funneling money into a primary account in the Cayman Islands. The payments were disguised as consulting fees. The second thread was her background. She wasn't Seraphina Dubois from a wealthy Parisian family as she claimed. Her name was Sophia Novak, born in a small town outside Warsaw. She had a juvenile record for petty fraud and a history of attaching herself to wealthy, powerful men, only to disappear after they suffered some form of professional or financial setback. She wasn't a socialite. She was a professional operative. The final damning thread came from a deep-dive surveillance of her communications. They found encrypted messages not with a lover, but with a handler. The messages were a series of reports and instructions. She'd been tasked with seducing Ethan Sterling, gaining his trust, and extracting sensitive information about the new green energy project, codenamed Project Terra. The public humiliation of Amelia was designated Phase 2, a strategy designed to destabilize Ethan emotionally, make him pliable, and discredit the family in the eyes of the market just before a crucial round of investor funding. The handler's digital signature was traced back to a secure server. A server owned by Vanguard consolidated Arthur Sterling's most aggressive and bitter rival, run by the smiling viper Alistair Finch. Finch hadn't just wanted to poach an executive or steal a patent. He had weaponized infidelity, aiming to cripple Sterling Enterprises by attacking its very foundation, the family. Serafina's feigned pregnancy claims her performance at the gala. It was all part of a meticulously scripted corporate espionage plot. The Cartier bracelet wasn't a gift from a besotted lover. It was a bonus payment for a job well done. David Barlow presented the findings to Arthur in a slim, leather-bound folder. It contained bank statements, unencrypted text messages, photos of Serafina meeting with Finch's lieutenant in a quiet Geneva cafe, and a complete psychological profile. Arthur read through the entire file without a single change in his expression. When he was done, he closed it and looked at David. "She has a younger sister," Arthur stated. David blinked, surprised by the non sequitur. "Yes, Anya Novak, studying art at the Slade School of Fine Art, on a full scholarship." "Which foundation provides the scholarship?" Arthur asked, his eyes glinting. David checked his tablet. A slow, cold smile touched his lips. "The Vanguard Arts and Education Fund." Arthur nodded. Arthur, leverage. Finch had provided him with the perfect weapon. The time had come to summon the players. He sent 2 messages. The first was to Alistair Finch. It was an invitation to an urgent and private meeting at the Sterling Tower. The second was to his son, Ethan. When Ethan entered the study, he looked marginally better than he had 10 days prior, but his eyes were still haunted. He had followed his father's orders, to the letter, living in a self-imposed prison of work and solitude. "Father," he began, "I have to see Amelia. I have to explain." "You will explain nothing," Arthur said, his voice flat. He pushed the leather-bound folder across the polished mahogany desk. "Read that." Ethan hesitated, then opened it. He started with the first page, his expression confused. Then, as he read on, his face went through a kaleidoscope of emotions: disbelief, shock, dawning horror, and finally a deep, sickening shame. He saw the bank transfers. He read the texts where Serafina mocked him to her handler. He saw the cold, calculated plan that had been laid out with him as the witless, egotistical pawn at its center. He learned that the secrets she'd prized from him, details about supply chains and patent filings for Project Terra, had already been used by Vanguard to undercut Sterling bids on 2 major government contracts in Germany. His affair hadn't just been a personal betrayal. It had cost his family's company hundreds of millions of dollars. When he finished, he looked up, his face ashen. The weight of his stupidity, his vanity, was crushing him. He hadn't been seduced. He had been dismantled. She used me," he whispered the words, tasting like ash. "All of it was a lie." "Yes," Arthur said, his voice devoid of sympathy. "Your ego made you the perfect target. You wanted to feel like a man who could have it all, and they gave you the fantasy. And in return, you gave them our family's future." Ethan slumped into a chair, his head in his hands. "What have I done, Amelia? Oh God, Amelia. Amelia has been magnificent," Arthur stated coldly. "She has remained silent and dignified, protecting our family's name more than you ever have. Now the question is, What do we do next? For the first time, Arthur's voice held a sliver of something other than contempt. It was a test. He was giving Ethan a chance, a final one, to prove he was a sterling. Ethan looked up, the shame in his eyes slowly being replaced by a cold, unfamiliar fury. It was the anger of a man who finally understood the depth of his own foolishness. "We destroy them," Ethan said, his voice low and shaking. "We destroy her, and we destroy Finch." Arthur Sterling allowed himself a ghost of a smile. Perhaps there was something of him in the boy after all. "Good," he said. "That is precisely the plan. But first there is a performance to be had, and you, my boy, have a starring role." The main boardroom at Sterling Enterprises was on the 80th floor, a cathedral of glass and steel that overlooked all of London. It was a room designed for intimidation, with a single massive black marble table that felt like an altar of corporate power. Alistair Finch, CEO of Vanguard Consolidated, arrived first, looking smug and confident. He assumed this meeting was a prelude to a quiet, shame-faced merger offer or a settlement to make the scandal go away. He was followed a few minutes later by a nervous Ethan Sterling. "Arthur," Finch said, extending a hand to the patriarch who sat at the head of the table. "Good to see you. And Ethan, tough few weeks, I imagine." Arthur ignored the hand. "Sit down, Alistair." The coldness in his tone wiped the smile from Finch's face. He sat suddenly uneasy. At that moment, the doors opened again. Seraphina Dubois walked in, looking stunning in a white power suit. She had been summoned under the pretense of discussing a generous severance package to ensure her silence. She smirked when she saw Ethan. Then her eyes widened in shock as she saw Alistair Finch. Her confident facade faltered for a fraction of a second. "What is he doing here?" she demanded, looking at Ethan. "He's here for the same reason you are," Arthur said calmly. "To answer for your crimes." Before either of them could respond, the doors opened one last time. Amelia entered. She was grace and strength personified, her pregnancy now more pronounced. She didn't look at Ethan or Seraphina. She walked calmly to the empty chair beside Arthur Sterling, who stood briefly in a gesture of respect he had never before shown his son. She was not here as a victim. She was here as a witness. "What is the meaning of this, Arthur?" Finch blustered. "If this is about your son's sordid little affair, this is not about my son's affair." Arthur cut in his voice like chipping ice. "It is about corporate espionage, market manipulation, and conspiracy to defraud. Crimes that carry a sentence of up to 20 years in prison." He gestured to David Barlow, who was standing silently in the corner. David tapped a button on a remote. The large screen behind Arthur flickered to life. The first image was a bank statement from the Cayman Islands account, showing a payment of $500,000 from a Vanguard Shell Corporation to Seraphina's account, dated the day after the gala. Finch went rigid. Seraphina's face went white. "We can start there," Arthur said pleasantly. "A bonus, I believe, for a successful destabilization campaign." David clicked the remote again. A transcript of a text exchange appeared on screen. "Handler. Phase 2 complete. Market is rattled. Board is nervous. Proceed to Phase 3. SD. He is completely broken. Believes everything I say. Ready to extract Terra source code." Ethan flinched as if he'd been slapped. Seraphina stared at the screen, her mouth agape. "That's fabricated," Finch spat. "You have no proof." "Oh, but we do," Arthur said. He nodded to David. A grainy photograph appeared on the screen, showing Alistair Finch himself dining with Seraphina at a private club in Zurich, 6 months ago, long before she had ever met Ethan. "I believe this was your initial recruitment meeting. My security team has a sworn affidavit from the waiter who overheard you discussing my son by name." Finch began to sweat. "And then there is the matter of your leverage," Arthur continued, his eyes locking on Finch. "Ania Novak, a brilliant young artist. It would be a tragedy if her scholarship funded by Vanguard were to be suddenly revoked due to a morals clause violation by her sponsoring family member. It would be even more of a tragedy if the Home Office were to discover that her student visa application was sponsored by fraudulent financial documents provided by her sister Sophia Novak, also known as Serafina Dubois." Serafina let out a small, strangled gasp. Her sister. He knew about her sister. This was the one thing she truly cared about, the one person she was trying to protect. "You bastard," she whispered, her eyes full of hatred. "I am a great many things," Arthur replied coolly. "A bastard is one of them. Now here is what is going to happen." He stood up, dominating the room with his presence. "Ms. Novak, you are going to sign a full confession detailing Mr. Finch's involvement in this entire scheme. You will return every penny you were paid. In exchange, your sister will finish her degree, and I will not press charges for wire fraud. You, however, will be on the next plane back to Warsaw. If you ever set foot in the UK again, you will be arrested." He then turned to Finch, whose face was a mask of terrified fury. "Alistair, you are going to divest yourself of all shares in Vanguard Consolidated. You will sell them to a holding company of my choosing at a 30% discount to yesterday's closing price. You will resign as CEO effective immediately, citing personal health reasons. You will sign a non-disclosure agreement so airtight that if you so much as whisper the word sterling in your sleep, my lawyers will own your soul. If you refuse this folder," he tapped the leather-bound file on the table, "goes to the Serious Fraud Office, the Financial Conduct Authority, and the Daily Mail. Your company will be annihilated, and you will spend your retirement in a prison cell." It was a complete and total checkmate. No negotiation, no discussion, just utter destruction. Finch stared at Arthur, his chest heaving. Serafina was openly weeping, her carefully constructed world shattered around her. This was the moment Arthur had orchestrated for his son. He looked at Ethan. "Well?" Ethan stood up. He walked not to his father, but around the table until he stood directly in front of Amelia. He didn't touch her. He just looked into her eyes, his own filled with a shame so profound it was painful to witness. "Amelia," he said, his voice raw, "there is no excuse for what I did. I was weak and foolish and vain. I broke my vows to you and I endangered our family. I will spend the rest of my life trying to earn back a fraction of the respect I have lost. I am so sorry." He then turned to face Serafina and Finch. His voice changed, losing its pleading tone and gaining a hard steel edge he had inherited from his father. "Sign the papers," he commanded. "Get out of our lives, and if either of you ever come near my wife or my child again, you will not have to deal with my father's lawyers. You will deal with me." Amelia watched him, her expression unreadable. She saw the broken man she pitied, but she also saw for the first time a flicker of the man he could be. Without a word, she stood up and walked out of the boardroom. Her part in the reckoning was over. The future was now hers to decide. The silence that followed the boardroom reckoning was more profound than any shouting match could ever be. It was the heavy, vacuum-sealed silence of a world irrevocably altered. For Amelia, walking away from that glass-walled room was like stepping from a raging inferno into the stark, cold air of reality. She did not feel triumph, only a vast, hollow exhaustion. The battle had been won, but the war had been fought on the soil of her own heart, and the landscape was scarred. She spent 2 days in her old flat, the one she had kept as a quiet rebellion against being entirely subsumed by the sterling name. She spoke to no one. She ate when she remembered to simple things like toast and tea, the mechanics of survival taking over. On the 3rd day, a formal hand-delivered letter arrived. It was from Ethan. Not a desperate plea, but a typed, almost legalistic request for 5 minutes of her time in a place of her choosing. He would wait in the lobby of her building the following afternoon, and if she did not appear, he would understand and not bother her again. Curiosity and a sense that some final thread needed to be snipped compelled her to go. She found him standing by the entrance, looking thin and diminished in a suit that now seemed too large for him. The arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by the brittle posture of a man held together by sheer will. "Thank you for coming down," he said, his voice hoarse. He didn't try to touch her, standing a respectful 6 feet away. "What do you want, Ethan?" Amelia asked, her voice calm, devoid of the anger he probably expected. It was worse. It was devoid of feeling altogether. "I wanted to tell you that my father has made arrangements for me. I'm being reassigned to the logistics division at the Sheffield plant." He said it like a condemned man reciting his sentence. "I'm leaving London tomorrow. I don't know for how long." I see she replied, offering nothing more. Desperation flickered in his eyes. "Amelia, I know sorry is a meaningless word after everything. It's pathetic. But I need you to know the moment I saw that file, the moment I understood I wasn't just a cheat, but a fool, a pawn. The only thing I could think about was you. What I had destroyed. Not my job. Not my reputation. You." He took a half step forward, then stopped himself. "I am going to do whatever it takes. I will work. I will go to therapy. I will read every book and do every ounce of work required to become a man who might one day be worthy of being in the same room as you and our child. I don't ask for your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just ask that you don't erase me completely. Let me write to you. You don't have to reply. Just let me write." Amelia looked at the man she had loved, the man who had shattered her world, and felt a flicker of something akin to pity. He was finally seeing the world clearly, but only after he had set it on fire. "You may write, Ethan," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You are the father of my child. That is a fact that cannot be erased. But you and I are over. You need to understand that. Whatever you are doing in Sheffield, you must do it for yourself, not for me. The future of this child is my only priority now." With that, she turned and walked back to the elevators, not looking back. She felt the weight of his gaze on her until the doors slid shut, severing the final tie. The next day, Arthur Sterling called her. His voice was businesslike. "I trust you are comfortable. I have taken the liberty of engaging a firm to handle your affairs. They will be in touch. Any and all expenses will be directed to my family office. Is there anything you require?" "I'm fine, Arthur." "Thank you," she said, surprised by the lack of pressure. "Good," he grunted. There was a pause. "He is gone. Ethan left for Sheffield this morning. I know. I spoke to him yesterday. Another pause, this one longer. Amelia could almost hear the calculations turning in his mind. Amelia, he finally said, his tone shifting slightly, losing some of its corporate frost. The strength you have displayed, it is the defining quality of our family, a quality I mistakenly thought my son possessed. I was wrong. It is you who carries it. My grandchild is fortunate to have you as its mother. Coming from Arthur Sterling, this was the equivalent of a Shakespearean sonnet of praise. Thank you, Arthur, she whispered, genuinely moved for the first time in days. Rest, he commanded, and the line went dead. The next 6 months passed in a strange, suspended reality. Amelia's world became small and quiet, a stark contrast to the sprawling public life she had led with Ethan. She embraced the anonymity. She reconnected with 2 old friends from university, women who knew her as Amelia. The art historian, not Amelia the Sterling appendage. They brought her gossip and stodgy puddings, and they never once mentioned the scandal. She prepared for the baby with a quiet determination. She bought practical soft cotton onesies instead of the designer monstrosities Serafina had championed. She read books on child development and art therapy for infants. She attended her checkups alone, her hand resting on her swelling belly, a silent promise to the life within that she would be enough for both of them. Once a week a letter would arrive with a Sheffield postmark. The envelopes were plain, the handwriting tight and controlled. Ethan's letters were not love poems. They were reports from the front line of his own soul. He wrote about the humbling experience of working on a factory floor, of being called Sterling. Not with reverence, but as a simple surname. He wrote about his therapy sessions, about unpacking the deep-seated insecurity and need for validation that had made him so susceptible to Serafina's manipulations. He never asked to come back. He only asked how she was feeling and if the baby was kicking. She read each one, then filed it away in a box, a chronicle of a man's attempt to rebuild himself from the wreckage he had created. Arthur, true to his word, kept his distance, but his presence was a constant, invisible safety net. When her obstetrician mentioned her pregnancy was high risk due to stress, a renowned specialist was suddenly available for a consultation. When she casually mentioned to her security detail that she missed a specific type of pastry from a small bakery in Paris, a box of them arrived warm the next morning via courier. He never called to discuss these things. They simply happened. It was his language of care, silent, overwhelming, and ruthlessly efficient. Then on a rainy Tuesday in early spring, her water broke. The birth was long and difficult, a solitary battle fought in the sterile white confines of a hospital room. But as the London dawn broke, painting the sky in watercolors of grey and rose, her son was placed in her arms. He was perfect, a tiny, furious miracle with a thatch of dark hair and eyes that, when they finally opened, were a startling, familiar shade of slate grey. Holding him, Amelia felt a love so fierce and absolute it eclipsed everything else. It erased the pain, the humiliation, the heartbreak. This was her purpose. This was her world. When the nurse asked for the name, she didn't hesitate. His name is Arthur, she said. Arthur James Sterling, not Junior. A name that honored the man who had been her protector, her silent champion. Arthur visited 2 days later. He arrived without fanfare, a single imposing figure in the hospital corridor. He looked awkward, almost timid, as he entered the room, holding a ridiculously small bouquet of white freesias. He stopped short when he saw the baby sleeping in Amelia's arms. "He is small," the great man observed, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain. "He is—" Amelia smiled. "Would you like to hold him?" He looked momentarily terrified, as if she had handed him a live grenade, but he dutifully washed his hands and sat, allowing her to place the tiny, swaddled bundle in his arms. The billionaire, the man who could move markets with a word, looked down at the infant with an expression of profound, unshielded awe. "You named him Arthur," he stated, his voice thick with an emotion she had never heard from him before. "He has your eyes," she said softly, "and I wanted him to have a name that stands for strength and honor and protection." Arthur Sterling was silent for a full minute, his gaze fixed on his grandson. When he looked up at Amelia, the last of his formidable defenses seemed to have crumbled. "No one has ever given me a gift of this magnitude," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You have secured the Sterling legacy, Amelia, not with a marriage or a contract, but with this, with him, with your own resilience." He stayed for an hour. Before he left, he turned to her, his corporate persona slipping back into place, but softened at the edges. "When you are ready," he began, "we need to discuss your future. I've been reviewing the philanthropic arm of the company. The Sterling Foundation is effective, but it lacks passion, soul. I am creating a new endowment focused on identifying and supporting undiscovered female artists. The Cassatt Endowment, I thought we'd call it. It will have an independent charter and a substantial budget. It requires a director with impeccable taste, a deep knowledge of the art world, and an unimpeachable character." He let the words hang in the air. This wasn't charity. It was a coronation. He wasn't giving her a job to keep her busy. He was giving her a division of his empire to command. Tears of gratitude, not sorrow, welled in her eyes. "Arthur, why, think about it," he said, cutting her off before she could protest. "The position will be waiting for you. You have more important work to do for now." He nodded at the baby, then at her, a gesture of profound respect. And then he was gone. That evening, with little Arthur asleep on her chest, his tiny breaths a comforting rhythm against her heart, Amelia made a decision. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she knew by heart. It rang 4 times, and she was about to hang up when he answered, his voice breathless and tinged with the noise of a factory floor. Amelia Ethan's voice was a cocktail of shock, hope, and terror. "Hello, Ethan," she said, her own voice calm and steady. "I wanted to let you know that you have a son. He was born yesterday." A choked, strangled sound came down the line. "A son? Is he? Are you both okay?" "We are both perfectly healthy," she said. "He is beautiful. He has dark hair, and he weighs 7 pounds and 3 ounces. She could hear him weeping now, not the self-pitying sobs of the past, but the ragged, heartbroken tears of a man utterly overwhelmed. "Thank you," he managed to say. "Oh God, Amelia, thank you for telling me. I will send you a picture," she continued, her voice softening slightly. "And when I feel ready, we can arrange for you to meet him. On my terms, Ethan. Do you understand?" "Yes," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Yes, of course. Whatever you say." "Amelia, what's his name?" She paused, then delivered the final defining statement of her new life. His name is Arthur. The silence on the other end of the line was filled with a universe of understanding. He knew what she was saying. The name was a message. The legacy had been passed, not from father to son, but from a patriarch to the woman his son had wronged. The future of the sterling name now rested in her hands and in the hands of the tiny boy she held. She had lost a husband, but she had gained an empire, and more importantly, she had found herself. The fairy tale was over, but her real life was just beginning. And so Amelia's story comes to a close. She endured the ultimate betrayal and a humiliation designed to break her spirit. But what her enemies saw as weakness, her father-in-law saw as quiet strength. They thought they were playing a game with his son, but they ended up in a war with the king, and the king never loses. Amelia didn't just survive. She rose from the ashes, stronger and more powerful than ever before, proving that the true sterling legacy wasn't in its name or its money, but in its resilience. What did you think of Arthur's cold, calculated revenge? Was it justice, or did it go too far? And what should Amelia do about Ethan? Does he deserve a second chance to be a father and a husband? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of betrayal, strength, and ultimate triumph resonated with you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who loves a story of sweet revenge, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas, just like this one. Thank you for listening.